I would encourage dads, if they're not involved in the youth ministry or if they're just trying to figure out a way to engage spiritually with their kids, is to ask questions. We all have to sit down and eat at some point or another. And if we sit around the table and we ask questions about the youth ministry or about the spiritual life of a young person, maybe they'll start off with, I don't know, but we can word questions in a way to get not a yes or no answer. And
welcome to the Faithful Fathering Podcast. This is Rick Wirtz, founder and president of Faithful Fathering, welcoming you, and thank you for joining us. Faithful Fathering is all about encouraging and equipping dads to be faithful fathers and to reinvigorate the church on the fathering front. The church, by definition, is all about relationships and primarily talking about youth and family and marriage. And the New Testament refers to Christ as the groom and the church as his bride. So that marriage relationship is foundational. So by extrapolation, family is foundational to the church as well. So the topic of this podcast series is youth and family ministry. And in the studio with us to talk about this a little bit is a dear friend, man, husband, father, super minister, and Memorial Church of Christ, Mike Avery. Mike, thank you for joining us.
well, thanks for having me, Rick. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm excited to join you on the podcast today.
Well, I know, we talk about the New Testament, talking about marriage, Christ and the church, but the Old Testament actually lays the foundation, doesn't it? That
Yes.
Genesis 2:24 says that for this reason, a man will leave his mother and father and be united to his flesh. They'll become one flesh. And then Malachi 2:15 says, why one? For the sake of raising godly offspring. So I always think that is so powerful and kind of puts a lot of pressure on us dads. But it is about relationship and that full family unit really providing the building block for the church, if you will.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about, I know your journey. Can you tell us a little bit about your home life growing up and your journey to accepting Christ?
Of course. Well, I grew up in East Texas in a Christian home. My parents were followers of Jesus and still are. And watching them serve in the church, not just attend, but be involved. And my mother helping with the children's ministry for many years, and my father helping with the van ministry and picking up the widows so they could attend worship. I knew growing up as a young man that being a Christian was more than just attending a service. But I had a long way to grow and still do. But growing up, and as I was growing up, of course, I was exposed to the gospel. And at the age of 14, I felt the call to follow Christ and made that commitment that at 14 and began following Jesus. But it was later in college, as in a campus ministry, where through Bible study, that I got a deeper understanding of the scriptures at that time, and was able to fully understand or better understand the commitment I had made and how that would look like in daily life.
And what college was that?
I was at Kilgore Junior College up there in Kilgore, Texas, just a small East Texas town, oil town, and spent a couple years there studying in a campus ministry and getting my undergrad, my basics out of the way before finishing up at Abilene Christian University with a finance degree.
So you hadn't decided that you were going to go into the ministry at that point.
Well, as I was studying at this campus ministry, I realized growing up in the church, I had kind of missed the point of Christianity, and I worried about other students that may come through and not really know what it truly meant to follow Jesus. And so I felt called by God in that moment to be a youth minister. However, my father was adamant that I get a business degree because he said ministry's unstable and you need a real degree so you can get a job if you need to. And so I did finish up the business degree the last couple of years, with still wanting to do ministry when I finished, and graduated back in 1999, and I got my first job in ministry, full-time ministry at Memorial Church of Christ, and I've been there ever since.
Holy cow! So you've been your first hire was the real deal. So
Yes.
that stability thing that your dad was concerned with.
It appears it was an unnecessary worry, but I still relied on his wisdom, and 25 years later, I'm still employed, so that's good.
That's a good sign. Now, when you came on full time, what was the what was the scope of your ministry at that point?
Oh wow, I was very young, and I got there and just eager to get the job, and the job description said birth through 12th grade and family ministry, and I, you know, I guess in my ignorance, I was happy to have a job. So I took it, and right away, some very sweet ladies in our church, some mothers, they said, "Look, we'll take care of the babies and the elementary. You just focus on the youth." And so I ran with that and got to work with the youth ministry there. And in those early years, I was just so excited to be teaching students about Jesus and all the worship times and the mission trips and the camps. Very exciting.
Fantastic.
So,
And what were the challenges early on? I mean, it sounds like I know some of the moms there at Memorial Church of Christ. That's they're angels.
oh yes, they're great. I would say probably early challenges is I was trying to prove myself in the job, and so from a job standpoint, I would say I took on the Superman or the Savior complex, and I immediately fired all the previous youth ministers volunteers and just went solo and did everything myself. And for after about 2 or 3 years, I really began to feel the burnout and the limit to my effectiveness without any volunteer help. And but fortunately, I had some mentors who had been in ministry longer than me and showed me the power of involving not only multiple volunteers, but turning back toward the parents and getting them involved in their children's spiritual journeys.
Okay. So the challenges were realizing what your capacity was as an individual, and then figuring out how to plug in to get the right volunteer. Did you get some volunteers online that could come in beside you?
It took a little while, but I did. And going back to that, another challenge I had was more on a personal level. Is I basically when I had been married maybe 5 months when I got this job. My wife was still finishing up her studies, transferred to a local university here, and I put my job before my family, and that was a big mistake. Burned a little bit of a bridge there with my wife, and I revolved our life around my job and expected her to be a volunteer at every single event that we had. And eventually she had her own job and school, and she said, "I'm not going to be your volunteer anymore." So
She quit you.
she quit me, and rightfully so. I misused I overwore my welcome on that one, and
I'd have quit me too. Right?
yeah. So, but after a few years getting some volunteers in place, things really started to flourish. And once I got out of the way and let the Holy Spirit do His job, the ministry started to see fruit.
Is there any specifics you can share how you got out of the way? What just maybe a glimpse of God's glory along the way? Just said, "Hey, I'm finally starting to do this right."
Well, I would say, we would our group. It wasn't just a numbers thing, but more of a spiritual depth thing. When I was leading the group, I was pretty young in my early 20s at that time, and getting into the Word. But as I opened up opportunities for other volunteers and sort of took myself out of the spotlight a little bit and found some people who were really gifted at teaching and serving, and I saw the students connecting with them in a deeper way, and then consequentially with the Lord. They were learning their own gifts and abilities by watching these other volunteers and being encouraged by them. And I think it's important as a minister to not feel that you're the only one that can do it, because we know God is greater and He can work through anybody. If He can speak through Balaam's donkey, then he could speak through anybody.
I've been compared to that before.
Uh, so we saw some fruit there, and really when we got into dividing up into small groups, that was a blessing in our youth ministry, and having 3 adults basically mentor these students from 7th to 12th grade. They would spend every Wednesday night with them for 6 years, September to May, take a break in the summers. But those relationships begin to form, and the students were connecting with these volunteers. And even after they went off to college and become adults, they have a relationship with these adults that they can turn to, especially in a critical time of adolescence when parents aren't exactly who they admire the most all the time. The parents are sometimes an adolescent thinks their parents are stupid and they don't trust them, or they just don't want to rely on their parents. And so it's good to have some other Christian influences, people that you trust in your life. It's amazing how these kids, when they grow up, though, they learn real quick. Hey, my parents are smart again.
Oh, I'm trying to remember, and just clarify for me if you can. But I'm understanding you set up to where volunteers would actually stay with that group
Yes.
through several years, right? They go in at what, middle school,
7th grade,
seventh
yes.
grade, and then they stay with that group all the way through high school.
Yes.
So that's a pretty unique situation, and that's what has produced a lot of the fruit that you're talking about there.
Yes, those long-term relationships. And it doesn't always work out. Sometimes we have people get transferred, or, life situation changes and they can't no longer serve as a volunteer. But for the most part, we've had these adults that will walk with these students from 7th grade, 11, 12 years old, all the way to 17, 18, sometimes even 19 years.
Wow.
And that's a critical point in life. And what's beautiful about it is we've trained our leaders to, they don't undermine the parents, and
Right.
they in fact they champion the parents. They advocate for them and encourage the students to have a relationship with their parents and to respect them and to talk to them. And kids come into the group and they're complaining about being grounded for bad grades, and my parents are terrible, they're grounding me. Well, these group leaders are like, well, what can you do to improve this situation? And kind of advocate. And it really makes a difference when you have somebody there that they trust, but that is also an advocate for the parents.
That was going to be my next question. Is that indeed they actually are there as a quasi support system for the parents, and advocating and validating the parents in the relationship with their children. But it also provides that connection that is your family piece of that ministry that just really solidifies the whole picture, because and you tell me, is this because you're taking, they've got their family, their biological family, but now they almost have a church family that is complementing that, so they understand that it's a kind of an extended family situation. Is that how you've built it and incorporated the family piece?
That's part of it. Yes, that is definitely how we've tried to aim toward the family. And early on, I thought, man, if these kids aren't in youth group, they're not going to know Jesus. But really, that's nothing's further from the truth. I witnessed that early on when we had a student who was very involved in a travel soccer team, and I just pretty much was ready to write that student off as they're not going to know who Jesus is. But on the contrary, their parents were very faithful. And even when they weren't in our building, the parents were doing Bible studies and worship out on whatever tournament they were on. And now I can gladly say this girl went on to play soccer at the collegiate level, won Big 12 Defender of the Year, won the Big 12 championship that year for Missouri. She is now a mother of 2 boys, and her husband's one of our worship leaders, and she's faithful and serving. And I realized way before now, but her faith was not necessarily dependent on the youth ministry, right? The youth ministry was there for her when she needed it, but she was getting that faith at home.
That's a critical step, I think, because I know over the years of fathering ministry, a lot of times dads were seen as more of the problem than the solution for youth ministry. They were trying to cover or make up for what dad did instead of engaging dad
Mm.
somehow or another. So it sounds like you've crossed that line pretty well to say, your family is the primary, or we're here to complement what's going on in the home. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. I kind of consider it like the youth ministries that maybe the icing on the cake, maybe even just the slice of bread. The parents are the steak.
Well, so that's a tremendous success story. That I think it sounds like there's a maturing that says, it isn't all about me as a minister or ministry leader, or even the group leaders. That we're all just kind of a piece of the puzzle that are
Exactly.
helping the child bring it all into focus in their personal, passionate relationship themselves as they
Right.
mature. The other thing I've seen you guys do at Memorial Church of Christ, as well, is that dads get to baptize their children a lot of times. How
Yes.
how cool is that as a youth minister to see a dad uh, move into that direction?
Well, we always encourage that if the dad feels comfortable and the student feels comfortable, because youth ministers most of the time come and go, but the relationship you have with your parents is a lifetime. Whether it's good or bad, you have some kind of connection there. And what a blessing to see a father baptize their child into Christ, and to when they make that commitment and to have that connection with your dad, being there, as in that prime moment, one of those, I guess you would say, it's a milestone moment of your faith, and have your father connected to it. What a blessing! And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so we really do encourage that a lot. The family ministry part of my role really didn't pick up until probably 6 or 7 years in,
Mm-hmm.
and then I started realizing, okay, this is more about the parents and what's going on at home, and less about the youth ministry. I mean, youth ministry is important,
Mm-hmm.
but what is of imperative, I mean, just as imperative, as the parents teaching their kids at home, like it says in Deuteronomy 6, right? As
Mm-hmm.
we walk along the road, when we get up, when we lay down.
24/7.
And so we really started emphasizing things about equipping parents, sending things home, sending things to the parents to do at home, encouraging those conversations. We instituted a family retreat that's been going on now for several years, 12 plus years. And in that retreat, it's emphasized we have a spiritual activity for families to do together, and they do games together. They do, activities, and they eat meals together. They stay together, and it's been a real blessing, to just emphasize the family, and uh, connecting the dots there spiritually with those families.
You're really enabling a maturing in sync. I think a lot of times, like I'd be on a spiritual growth, my bride would not be. So we wouldn't
Mm.
be growing together. And it sounds like you're really facilitating that as the child grows spiritually, the parents are ahead of the game, or at least there, and carrying that baton forward, if you will. So that's
Yeah.
awesome. That family retreat is I know that's quite a big hit. How many do you usually get on that?
We usually take 35 families or so, close to 150, 200 people. And it's a big weekend. And, we have everything from little newborn babies all the way up to teenagers. And so it's a mix, and it is complicated at times to create a family activity that will impact its toddlers and teens, but we try to have variations on those, so the conversations can be on an appropriate level. And honestly, we've been encouraged and equipped a little bit on how those can look by the little connect cards that you've used and that we've used through our fathering ministry
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
at Memorial.
Fantastic. Well, what words of encouragement would you have for a dad out there that maybe feels like he's been left out of the or I mean, youth ministry is always looking for volunteers, but what about if he feels not engaged spiritually, and or that the church really focuses on youth ministry, nothing about family? Is there
Mm.
any encouragement you would give a dad or even a church that says, this is something to consider?
Well, sure. As far as the church goes, I would encourage any ministers out there to involve parents. There's a myth that goes around like, well, I want to give my child space to grow. Well, that's not biblical. It says that we're supposed to be there with them, and parents are worried they're going to cramp their child's style or not let them be who they are. But I think it's good to be involved in the youth ministry. Some of my biggest influencers when I was a teen were dads of other students, not necessarily my youth minister. And so, and I still know their names and still talk to those guys, even though it's been 30 plus years ago since I was involved in that youth ministry. And so I would say as a church, encourage parent involvement in your youth ministry, and just tell them to be themselves and be consistent. Consistency is key to building those relationships with your own kids and the students as well. From a parenting standpoint, I would encourage dads, if they're not involved in the youth ministry or if they're just trying to figure out a way to engage spiritually with their kids, is to ask questions. We all have to sit down and eat at some point or another. And if we sit around the table and we ask questions about the youth ministry or about the spiritual life of a young person, maybe they'll start off with, I don't know, but we can word questions in a way to get not a yes or no answer, and really just ask them some questions. And there's a lot of resources online for that. I know you have plenty of those, just questions you can ask to engage, to get the thing going. Share your favorite verse, and not to come across as a preacher, but if you open up and read a scripture and say, this is why this verse is powerful to me, and maybe share a story of how it impacted you in a tough time or a good time in your life and helped you spiritually. I know kids love stories. And so the things I remember my dad telling me is spiritually was when he would share a verse and then he would relate it back to a moment in his life and tell me a story, and I would get a picture of a moment of his life, and those stuck with me through the years. And listening is key.
What a concept. That's good stuff, Mike. Thank you. Well, dads, you heard it, that if you have a church that has a youth and family ministry as healthy as Mike is talking about, I encourage you just to engage to a new level. If they don't, you know that you have family ministry right there around the dinner table. So lead spiritually by example, and you'll have the family ministry that will complement whatever your church is doing. So engage that way, and that's the dad you're called to be, and that's the dad the next generation needs. God bless. Godspeed.